developmental scenario. Mark, we don't know what he would have gone on to say, because he finishes his account very abruptly. Scholars debate over whether Mark is complete. He intended to finish there, or whether he actually had an ending that subsequently got lost from verse 9 and following. So we don't really know what Mark would have said. And then Matthew and Luke are written approximately around the same time, and Luke doesn't seem to be literally dependent upon Matthew. So really your only data points are Matthew and Luke and John in terms of your developmental trajectory.
Sure, but of course the lack of the appearance narrative in Mark is part of that trajectory. Of course, this could be explained partly by that trajectory, or perhaps by the fact that he did write it and it got lost, or he just decided not to write it, of course. But I'm just kind of using the evidence that's being presented to me here, which are 4 Gospels, the first of which contains no resurrection appearances. And I'm thinking, what might explain the fact that as time goes on, the fancifulness of the stories seems to increase. Indeed, ending in John, the final edition, with the addition of doubting Thomas, which seems to be a moral lesson against requiring evidence for belief. Of course, after Thomas touches the wounds of Jesus, Jesus says that it's, he now believes, but blessed are those who believe without seeing. He believes because he's seen. Blessed are those who believe without seeing. So what we get is, the further away we get from the actual events that are being reported, the more fanciful the stories, culminating in a story that has a moral lesson advising people that they shouldn't desire to believe on the basis of evidence. It seems to me strange.
Saying they're at all. In fact, in the very same chapter, he goes on to say, John, the author, goes on to say that these things are written that you might believe that he is the Christ and thus have life in his name. In terms of what he says in verse 29 to Thomas, he's chiding Thomas for not having believed in sufficient evidence, because he had the testimony of the other apostles. He'd been with Jesus throughout his ministry and observed the miracles and so forth.
Of course, John is writing at the end of John why he wrote his gospel, but I'm quoting the words of Jesus, right? So there's kind of there's a disanalogy here, or a difference here, which is that Jesus is saying, you believe because you've seen, blessed are those who believe without seeing. It's then John who says, oh, but I decided to write this down so that people will come to believe. That it's kind of 2 separate sources there.
Sure. So first of all, I gave an explanation for an interpretation of what I think Jesus is saying. And secondly, Jesus, if you look elsewhere, for example, in Matthew 11, when John the Baptist sends disciples to Jesus, are we the one we're expecting, or should we wait for another? He says, well, go back to John, tell him what you hear and see. And he talks about the miracles that he's been performing. Right? He talks about the sign of Jonah and his resurrection as being evidence for his incarnation and divine identity.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
Is there like a question?
Yeah, so I'm objecting to that particular point, that Jesus does seem to affirm approaching this topic evidentially.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. That would be fine. I'd be fine to just kind of drop that point about John, but I'm not really sure if we should.
Okay.
It seems to me that seems to be the most natural reading of doubting Thomas. You're saying that the story should in fact be interpreted as Jesus basically saying, you have believed because you've seen a lot of evidence. Blessed are those who believe having seen sufficient evidence, or something like this?
Yeah, so Thomas was discontent with having sufficient evidence, that he should have believed on the basis of what he already had. And God doesn't take well to people not believing when they've already got sufficient evidence.
Right, I see. That might be plausible. I'm happy to look into it.
I did want to ask you, though, about your low intrinsic probability of miracles.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So, can you justify why you come to that conclusion?
I guess the point that I was kind of trying to make there was to say that in the context of this discussion, do you expect a naturalist to take as seriously the hypothesis that a man rose from the dead as he should take the hypothesis that, say, Jesus didn't die or something? Like, in other words, like, I suppose you're not surprised that somebody would not do that, but you're saying that they're being kind of irrational in doing so?
Correct.
Because in assuming that something like a miracle would have a lower intrinsic probability?
Exactly. So I'm interested in what your justification is for assigning such an intrinsically low probability to miracles.
Wouldn't you say, like as you said, the fact that this doesn't happen elsewhere would not be a good response, because that's what we'd actually want. This is
what
God
we'd expect.
Is trying to do. He's trying to put forward a unique event. Could not the same be said that the reason why the resurrection is a powerful vindication of Jesus' message is because it has a low probability of occurring, and so that makes it miraculous that God did it, right? Like, it seems to me that the intuitive force of saying, isn't it amazing that Jesus rising from the dead, isn't it amazing that happened and this vindicates his message, is because of the fact that we should expect this to be so improbable that if it really did happen, this provides strong evidence. And I also wonder if you think that it would provide the same evidence as any other miracle. That is, I don't know why it is that rising from the dead specifically, except maybe the fact that he predicted it, would be any more of indication of his divinity than his ability to turn water into wine. If there was an instance of him having predicted that he would go on to do that and then did that, this seems equally miraculous. This is I don't see why the resurrection in particular would offer of indication.
Sure. So a number. Okay. So I'm trying to formulate a question. So Isaiah 53:10, for example, speaks about the resurrection in the context of messianic prophecy. Jesus himself says that the resurrection will be the vindication of his messianic divine self-claims. And so it's very surprising if God raises Jesus from the dead if he's a false Messiah, for example, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. I think that answers it quite well, I think.
I'd
I'd like to talk about Paul, if we can. I
course.
tried to ask a moment ago what it is you think about the conversion of Paul specifically that bears on the divinity of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, very quickly then. So in if we read the book of Acts, chapter 9, I would argue that Acts was written by a traveling companion of Paul, and I think that we can show with a high level of confidence that the account in Acts 9 concerning Paul's conversion actually most likely reflects
I'm willing to grant that.
Yeah. It seems to me that Paul is sincere in his conviction that Christ appeared to him on the road to Damascus. And that's clear from the way that Paul converts to Christianity against his own self-interest.
The first thing, okay, so there's the point about self-interest and there's the point about him appearing to Paul. Sometimes the conversation goes something like this. Somebody will say that, well, maybe the disciples were just lying.
Yep.
And one response to this is to say, well, this can't be the case because Jesus actually occurred to some people, which included his enemies, such as Paul. But you recognize that the appearance to Paul is nothing like the kinds of appearances that are described at the ends of the Gospels.
Sure.
That is, it's not a physical Jesus, there's not a man who walked up to Paul, but rather just a bright light and a voice that he hears.
But notice that there is a sensory experience that it has upon his traveling companions.
Yes.
And also notice that he's blinded, he's healed by Ananias.
Yeah, there's an interesting study about that actually in terms of like somebody having an epileptic fit and its ability to cause temporary blindness. It's actually remarkably similar to the experience of Paul. But and of course the other his companions are said to have kind of heard what was said. It's possible that was reported because like Paul might have just told them or something like this. It's at least plausible. They certainly didn't see the vision that Paul saw. Of course, there's also this point about the fact that Paul was a persecutor. So why would he suddenly sort of start believing in Jesus on the basis of this appearance? I think it's quite easy to say or to suggest that somebody who's engaged in the persecution of Christians would have something like a kind of guilt-driven appearance of Christ. I mean, you could make an analogy, for instance, to a lot of vegans will tell you that one of the reasons that maybe they went vegan, I've heard this a few times, is that they used to eat meat all the time, and they were watching factory farm footage, they just didn't really care, and then they had this dream where a cow appears to them and says, Jonathan, why are you persecuting me? And they say, why are you forcing me into a gas chamber? And then they wake up and they go, oh my gosh, and from that day onwards they become a vegan. Now I could say that, well, the fact that somebody just had this vision, and especially if they had it in the daytime and with a blinding flash of light and they thought it was kind of not a dream, in other words, I could say that their sudden conversion to veganism is best explained by the undeniable truth of veganism. Or I could say that it's because they were feeling guilty about what they've just done. And if Paul has just overseen the stoning of, who is it? The stoning of Stephen,
yeah.
Thank you. The stoning of Stephen, he's watched this take place. He goes on a long walk with lots of time to think to himself. Don't you think it's not too surprising that he might have something like an experience driven by guilt, and that would explain why a persecutor becomes a Christian, not the truth of Christianity.
Short response,
Okay.
yes.
Briefly, so yeah, that's a possibility, but is it probable? So, for example, Paul describes in Philippians 3:4-6, he says, if anyone else thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness, under the law, blameless. He seems quite content in his former ways of Judaism. Also, in regards to guilt-based conversion. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders says that women are 5 to 1 times more likely to experience conversion psychosis. Also, adolescents, military persons in battle, people of low economic status, and those with a low IQ are also more likely prone to experience this phenomenon. And Paul doesn't seem to fit that reference class.
Thank you. That's all we have time for. Sorry.
The full conversation that the clip you just watched was taken from is available via the link that just appeared on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This episode of the Cosmic Skeptic podcast is brought to you by you. To support the podcast, please visit patreon.com/Cosmic Skeptic.
Say you saw a little bucket of uterus, or a bucket of, not uterus, but what's
Placenta.
the placenta, right? If you saw a little placenta on the ground, you'd be like, ugh, look. If you didn't know it was placenta, say you're walking by, you'd be like, oh my God.
Have you seen live placenta?
A hippopotamus sneezed over here. No.
Dude, when I saw placenta for the first time, when my wife gave birth, it's an alien. Like, that is not of this world. It's the craziest thing you've ever seen. And it's just, they just grow that, man. They can just do that. It's an organ that they grow and then eject. It's nuts.
Who does it?
Who does what?
Grows it.
Well, I mean, I'm assuming like it's something, the DNA. It like, once you're pregnant, it just sort of, their body's not.
Oh, women.
Who did you think I said?
I don't know. I thought someone was growing it somewhere.
My friend's a placenta farmer. And he invited me over, and it was just, they grow it in aquariums, lots of jizz. It's basically jizz and honey, and like, depending, like everyone has a different recipe.
Yeah, you have there's a bunch of Asians beating the rice off of it out in like little boats.
There's all kinds of ways to make placenta, Theo, these days. Especially my grandmother's placenta recipe is insane.
Oh yeah, dude. I've had paella. I've had placenta. It's like just depends on the holiday.
Oh my God, when you get a wonderful placenta, it's so great. Harder to find these days. I don't mean to be like an old man and complain, but when I was younger, you would get like much better placenta.
Oh, the Christmas placenta my grandparents would bring over.
Oh my God, the smell of fresh placenta bubbling from the stove.
Yes,
Cinnamon
roasting on an open fire. God, it was good. And
So
my
good.
grandmother would put cinnamon on hers.
Are you kidding me? It's so interesting, man. It's so interesting. Yeah. So this was like a big in my family over Christmas dinner. My grandfather was like, "Why don't we add cinnamon to the placenta?" And like my grandmother just started weeping and walked out of the room. So ever since then, I've been afraid to try it, but I've heard it gets you super high.
Yeah, it's a real. It's brought families together for years. I think.
Yeah, I think it's an American tradition. I don't know why people are against it. It's just like, what? You can adapt. You can adjust.
Yeah, have you ever read Grapes of Wrath, dude? That book was a half chapter away from them eating a bowl of boiled placenta.
That's right. Yeah, just eat it. Eat the placenta. Eat whatever you want.
I mean, the last page of that book, they're breastfeeding off their own sibling, I think, because they were so starving in that book.
Well, I mean, did you hear, like, when they recovered Jim Morrison's body in the bathtub in Paris? His mouth was full of placenta. A lot of people think it was heroin that killed him, but, like, he got high and choked on placenta. Like, Parisian placenta.
Ooh.
Which is good.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not to sound snobby, but I don't think anything beats the placenta of France.
Yeah.
You sound exactly like someone serving placenta in Paris. You've done this. You've been on the placenta tours. I went on a whole placenta bike tour of Paris. It was the best week of my life.
Hope you enjoyed that video, and you can watch another. And you can watch this one, you can watch this one. Different options, different choices. Some guy just brings you one option, not this.
What's that? We're going on a trip, a very tiny bit on it. One day we're going to see Mount Fuji. It's a bit overcast, so maybe it clears up. I don't know. Will we see it? Will who knows? Follow along.
Unexpected stop. There's a cool lakeside music thing here we're checking out. We're almost right by the hotel. It's really pretty around here. We never actually went, surprisingly, around Mount Fuji yet, so It's cool to explore. It's way different vibe. Mountains all over. It's really pretty. We just arrived at our little glamping spot. It's super nice. And the sun just came out as well. Mount Fuji is covered. Maybe tomorrow. It's one of those things, you have to be a little lucky to see it. And that's our little sleeping tent. Should we check inside? The door is so tiny. Oh, it's an actual tent. Oh wow, it's super cute. It's bigger than it looks like. They trick you with a small door. You sleep there? Yeah. I can't believe this is a tent. What? Oh, it's hard. Yeah, it's so much clearer now. Damn, it's still got snow on it. Wow. We were hoping maybe we would get like a red Mount Fuji with the sunset, but I don't think that happens this time of year. Real Maine barbecue. Oh yeah. You ready here? Should I put it here or here? Your corn is served. I love the zucchini. They're like crispy. Going from across the can.
Did you know thousands of data brokers have secret shadow profiles of you, and they include a frightening amount of details.
Online privacy.
Data is our currency.
And some of the buyers are actually in the business of selling your data over and over again.
It's really surprising to me how companies can take your private information, sell it, and somehow that's legal. This information can be used by scammers, strangers, insurance companies, banks, businesses, even the government. And they can all use this information against you, while also making a good profit out of it. Where's my money? My money. Apparently, my email address is worth $89 to any brand. I want that $89. The good news is you can remove it. The bad news is it will take you over 300 hours to do so. Opting out of this has been made difficult by default, and that's where Incogni comes in. All you gotta do to get your personal information removed is sign up, pay a small bit amount of money, and then sit back and relax and let Incogni do the work. It's a really great service, and I recommend you guys check it out to protect your privacy. Incogni will take care of it all for you, and you can track it easily online. And I know what you're thinking. Felix, this sounds great. Can you cut me a deal, though? Of course. Right now, if you go to incogni.com/PewDiePie, you get 60% off. From what I can tell, it's a very competitive price if you guys use the offer, so I recommend taking advantage now. So click the link below to get your personal information wiped off the internet, as it should have been from the beginning. Thank you, Incogni, for sponsoring this video.
This tent is so cozy. That was really nice. I would definitely come back here. Tomorrow we're going to a park. Now we're gonna watch a movie. Good night, gamers. I'm gonna fade down the light so it looks like it says good night. There you go. Super cozy. Damn, so clear now. What a view. Unreal. I love the Fuji cones. Who needs Mount Fuji when you have this one right there? soda and pineapple. And it's Pokemon, so I am 33. Oh, it's got the chewy bits in it. Did I use it right? She told me how to use it.
Gorgeous.
We stopped by a village on the way here. It's very old style, traditional. You found a big bug. That's a stink bug, Momo. That's disgusting. Do not kill it. Yeah, it probably didn't taste good, did it? Lesson learned, Momo? The insects are coming to Japan. I don't like it. Something you don't like here, Momo? She's freaked out by something. Oh, someone's a little... Are you on edge, Momo? Is it the New Year's rape? So I'm just putting up the things that will hold up the shelves. And I got a little helper here. Hello. Alright, all done. We'll get so much more storage now. Very happy with that. Took a little less than an hour. That's so much better. And now we have space for more board games. Usually I go for digital versions. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. The reason I pre-ordered it is not for the game. This goes in the trash. It's for this. If you pre-ordered it in Japan, you get a spoon. Way better. It's a nice spoon. Some say it looks like any other spoon. But it says Legend of Zelda on it. This spoon is going to be worth billions. Good spoon. I'll eat with this tonight, thank you. What the hell? Oh my god! You're lucky you got in the car earlier. You don't have a drop on you.